to the Bible Feed podcast, a place for conversations about the Bible and faith in the modern world, where ordinary people come together to help each other understand the Bible better. Let's get started.
Okay, so welcome to the Bible Feed podcast. We say in our little introduction that we're all about conversations about the Bible and faith in the modern world, and we talk about the Bible and faith and beliefs and all those kind of biblical concepts. But all of that is built on a foundation, and that foundation is that it's reasonable to say yes to the question: is there a God? And that has to be a reasonable thing to say, a reasonable conclusion to come to for everything else that we talk about, the Bible and faith and belief and theological concepts, all of that stuff to follow and to make sense. So that's what we're going to talk about in this episode. I'm Paul Davenport, and I'm joined by Sam Day. Delighted to have you. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Paul.
And
thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. And we're going to talk about three classic arguments for God. But before we get into them, Sam, why don't you kick us off with just thinking about how do you even start to approach a question like that? Is there a God?
Okay. Well, the first thing that I'd probably say, which might sound shocking to some people, but it is that you kind of alluded to this, but we'd want to avoid biblical arguments for God.
Sure.
And that is because I suppose when we think of the Bible as a kind of collection of books, it's written to kind of the people of God. It's not a book that is trying to kind of argue for the existence of God. That's not what it's doing.
Right.
What it's doing is it's speaking to believers, and it's giving them more profound kind of insights to the nature of this God and his purpose, his plan, what he's done in the past, what he's going to do in the future, and our kind of position in it.
Okay.
So it's not, that's not the purpose of kind of scripture, to give you reasons why God exists. Really, you come to the Bible already believing in God and to find out more about him. So you can also highlight the kind of the danger that you might fall into kind of a trap of circular reasoning when you use the Bible to kind of argue for God's existence. Okay. So I might say, read the very first verse of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," and say, well, there's a good reason why I might believe in God. Not only believe in God, but believe that he created the world. But someone can easily just say, well, why do you believe that? And, a typical response might be, well, I believe that the Bible speaks the truth because it's of divine origin. Yeah. It's the words of God. But you can see what I'm doing. I'm presupposing the existence of God in order to use the Bible to argue for the existence of God, just going round and round. So what we really need to do is have objective reasons from evidence from the world around us that anyone, whatever their background, whether or not they're an atheist or a theist, or they've been brought up to believe whatever, we want people, regardless of kind of their worldview, to be able to look at this evidence and observe kind of the world around them. That's what we're kind of
something objective and universally accessible.
Yeah,
as evidence. Cool.
Yeah. And the second point I suppose to make would be, when we come to think about these arguments for God's existence from these more objective reasons, is that they can be quite complicated, and they can be quite philosophical. That philosophers have these reasons for God, and that can put a lot of people off when you see how they can sometimes be presented in a very kind of philosophical and formal way. But what's useful about them is that in their simplest form, they're really appealing to kind of premises that just seem so intuitive and so instinctively true. Okay. So in that way, they're quite powerful.
So they have a sort of inherent simplicity, and I suppose again in our introduction we say that what we're about is ordinary people trying to understand these things better, rather than highly trained philosophers or scientists. So let's get into the three arguments that we want to consider. So which one do you want to start with? So
the first argument is called the cosmological argument for God's existence, and this is sounds fancy, but it's really quite simply it's a type of argument. So there's types of cosmological argument, and it's an argument that is suggesting that God is the best explanation for the existence of the universe. And it's really appealing to kind of the premise that something can't come from nothing. But that seems to be a silly thing to say.
So
it doesn't seem to be reasonable.
So it's an explanation for why there is something rather than nothing.
Yeah. So the existence is something. It's a big something. It's complicated. It's very big, but it doesn't have to be. It's still just a whole bunch of kind of lots of contingent things that depend on other things for their existence. So even when we take the whole of the universe, it still needs to have an explanation for its existence.
Sure. Okay.
And so the argument is saying the universe needs to have an explanation. And when you think about what that cause of the universe or explanation would be, it would have to be something that causes the entirety of space and time, the entire universe. So it would be the cause, therefore, would have to be something that exists outside of time, outside of space. So it's a spaceless, timeless, uncaused cause. It would also have to be really powerful in order to bring into existence the entire universe. There's a type of cosmological argument called the Kalam cosmological argument, and that argument is similar, but it's arguing against the possibility of an actual infinite number of things. So they're slightly different in that it's saying the universe had to have had a beginning, and that is because if it didn't have a beginning, if it existed infinitely into the past, that would mean that there would need to be an infinite number of past events. But the problem with this is that infinity is like a concept that exists in mathematics, but there are good reasons to think that infinity can't actually exist as an actual number of things. So if you had an infinite number of past kind of days, we'd never really have got to today. If we're kind of slowly working through day after day after day, well, we wouldn't have got to today. So there's kind of reasons why infinity is kind of a really problematic idea. So the Kalam cosmological argument is saying that the universe can't have existed infinitely into the past. There must have been a beginning, and that explanation therefore must be timeless.
Yeah. Okay. So, which is actually consistent with the general consensus in terms of the scientific view of the universe and its past, which is that it had a beginning, and that there's evidence that can be put forward now around the cosmic background radiation and so on, which indicate that the universe had a beginning, however many billion years ago, 16 billion years ago. So although that Kalam argument is a philosophical argument against the universe having always existed in a steady state, the idea that the universe had a beginning is consistent with the scientific consensus view of the universe.
So both science, there are scientific reasons and philosophical reasons why that kind of premise that the universe had a beginning is true. Yeah.
And so if the universe had a beginning, then it begs the question, we require an explanation for...
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that. That was
what caused that beginning.
That's right. That first, the Kalam argument is initially, the first premise of the argument is that everything that begins to exist has to have a cause. Then you can show that the universe must have
had a beginning.
Had a beginning, and therefore the universe had a cause. And that cause, when you think about what that would be, as we've mentioned, it must be this kind of powerful, spaceless, timeless kind of explanation.
So really, then, accepting that the universe had a beginning and therefore needs a cause, the question is about what is the nature of that cause. And you've already said, well, it must be something that's outside of the construct of our universe, which is around space, time. But you also said it's powerful. And I guess that's self-evident, really. It must have been a powerful cause. Is that as far as that argument can go? Something outside space and time with power was the cause of the universe.
So the Kalam version of it actually does go further, because it argues for that this cause would be personal. That would be another attribute, which seems kind of at first to be strange. Why would it have to be personal? But when you think about the types of explanation that kind of give rise to a certain effect, you can have scientific explanations for things, which are like the laws of nature that act on certain kind of conditions. But you can also have personal explanations, which is like an agent that freely chooses to do something, and that's also a valid explanation. So when we're talking about the cause of the whole universe, of all of time and space, it couldn't be a scientific explanation, because before the beginning of the universe, there is no universe for any laws to kind of work upon. There's no initial conditions. So
do you want to give an example of a personal explanation versus a scientific explanation? Just
okay. So I think say like you could ask the question, why can I hear music? And one possible explanation would be, well, there's a string which is vibrating. That string is causing sound waves to pass and travel through the air through to my ear, and my ear is those vibrations are passing into my ear, and my brain's kind of actually I'm not a scientist, but sound goes into the ear. So hair follicles in the ear pick up on those vibrations and sends electric stuff to my brain. And I interpret that as sound, right? A scientist could explain that better, but you get the point. That would be like a kind of scientific explanation. But the same question could be asked, why can I hear music? And you could be like, well, so-and-so is playing the piano. So,
right. Okay.
But they're both valid explanations.
Yeah.
That they both explain the fact that you can hear music. They're both true, but they're different.
Yeah. And in some ways, the second that personal type of explanation is more interesting because why are they playing? You might have an emotional response to whatever it is that's being played, whether it's being played well or not, and things like that. So that's good. So that's helpful in distinguishing between those.
Yes.
So the Kalam argument suggests that a personal type of explanation can be inferred from the kind of cause that gave the universe a beginning. So.
The only reason I gave was really because there are only really two types of explanation, and because of the negation of the scientific explanation, you're left with a personal explanation. But there are other reasons why that support that this cause would have to be a personal explanation. And I suppose that has to do with the idea that this cause needs to be, if it was some kind of mechanism that existed timelessly, because that's one of the aspects of this cause, any effect would also exist simultaneously with it. So like, for example, if we're talking about that string that's vibrating and causing sound waves to pass, if the mechanism, if the cause is a mechanism like a vibrating string that exists timelessly, then any effect is also going to exist with it. So that's not but the problem with that is that we've got a beginning of the universe. There has to be some cause that begins kind of the temporal effect, that is the beginning of time and space. So you need a timeless cause which brings about the beginning of the universe. And so really the only thing you've got there that can fit that is something that can freely choose to create the universe. So that's another reason why this cause needs to be personal. It needs to be kind of have this to be able to exist timelessly, but to bring about this temporal change.
Yeah. Okay. So I kind of get that, but we've said there's personal types of explanations and scientific types of explanations. I guess there could be another kind of explanation that we're not aware of, I guess.
Yeah.
So let's think about some possible objections to that cosmological kind of style of argument, which is, universe had a beginning, something must have caused it. The kind of cause must be powerful and outside of space and time. So, and that's what, for want of a better phrase at this point, we're putting the label God on.
Yeah.
So, the typical objection is, well, you've just created something called God that sits outside the universe. What caused God? What is the cause for God?
Well, a response to that, I suppose, would be that asking the question of what caused this cause that we're describing is that, by definition, this cause is uncaused because it's a timeless explanation that's bringing about the entirety of time and space. So that's one thing. The other thing to say would be that you could just keep on asking that same question. Well, what caused the thing that caused the universe? Well, what caused that? Well, what caused that? And you're going to end up with an infinite regress. And so there needs to be a kind of an uncaused absolute kind of first cause that gives rise to all of the other possible explanations of things.
Yeah, I mean, it's an intriguing question because you almost can't ask the question in the right terms, because to say what caused God, you're using a term cause, which is sort of inherent to our universe. With time and space, you have one thing happens, that causes another thing to happen.
Yeah.
After that, something else happens. And that's because we're in this space and time construct. And so to say what caused God or what came before the universe kind of doesn't make sense as a question, because there was no time before the universe.
Before the existence of time.
Yeah. So it's sort of by definition that first cause has to be something that is outside the bounds of time, and therefore cause and effect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think often the objection feels of asking the question what caused God is like it comes from people's views of what they think God is. If they think God is just some kind of thing that isn't doesn't if you call it God, that can put people off, I suppose, and you kind of think, well, what caused God? But the idea is that the argument isn't really giving you God, it's giving you this cause which is uncaused and timeless and spaceless. And
that's all it's arguing for. Although the Kalam version of the argument goes a little bit further. And I suppose yes, the objection to that is, well, that's pushing it a bit too far. The basic premises of the argument don't get you as far as inferring a personal cause, is it? So I mean, let me just kind of phrase that objection a little better, perhaps, which is that the inference is that it's a single personal agent. And I suppose the objection could be, well, that's pushing it too far. There could be a whole multitude of personal causes that could be the first cause.
Yeah. So if you're suggesting that there are multiple kind of personal agents that are involved, then I suppose one reason to kind of refute that, or it would be to say that there's not really any good reason to multiply, causes. There's no reason to do that. That actually a simpler explanation is better. So I'd probably appeal to that kind of principle of the sort of Occam's razor. Occam's razor. So there's no good reason to postulate multiple uncaused causes. That if there is one is kind of a simpler explanation. Therefore, it's a better explanation. You could also say that kind of the coherence and unity and oneness of the universe, which maybe we'll touch upon later, but that implies that there's a single kind of single mind creator kind of behind it, rather than many.
Yeah. Okay. I get that. So because the universe has that universal coherence. Suggests a single agent. Okay. Cool. Okay. So that's a little bit about the cosmological argument in its simplest forms and some of its complications. So let's move on to the second argument. What do you want to talk to us about as the second?
So the second type of argument, or type, the second type of arguments is called the teleological arguments. So another fancy word. But, so these arguments, we're moving away from thinking about an explanation of the entire universe and thinking more about the way in which the universe exists. So talking about the kind of the appearance of design that's perceived in the natural world. So that our world is immensely ordered and coherent and complex. And I suppose the argument really on its very simplest form is saying, is that just one huge coincidence, or is there some kind of explanation for this incredible order that we find in the universe? And the argument is suggesting, well, the best explanation for this very ordered appearance of design world is that there is an intelligent, coherent mind behind it that has designed it.
So essentially the premise is that things that have complexity and order, features of design, have a designer. And the universe has kind of complexity and order, and therefore we infer from that there is a designer. So what sort of characteristics of the universe display such order and in complexity?
Well, I suppose there's a type of teleological argument known as the fine-tuning argument, and essentially that says that there are scientists have discovered these kind of laws of nature and laws of physics, which when they are kind of presented in kind of mathematical equations, they contain certain values, specific values, constants. So like the gravitational constant, the law that kind of describes gravity, as in it within
speed of light and things like that.
Things like that. So there are these kind of very finely tuned, precise constants that are part of these laws of nature, and the laws of nature also work upon like kind of they're what governing the physical kind of natural world. And so the other point would be that there are also quantities that define the initial conditions of the universe, so on which these laws operate. So that would be like the amount of entropy, and these are also things that are incredibly finely tuned, that there's a certain amount of something, so that these constants and quantities are precise. And the argument of fine tuning is that how do you what the question would be, what it best explains the fact that these constants and quantities are so precise and kind of finely tuned. Well, it could be like we've already talked about, but it could be that it's chance. It could be that they've been designed, that there's a they've been designed. And I suppose the other option is that they just have to exist. They just have to be what they are. But both the real problems with kind of saying what explains this incredible fine tuning of the universe is chance, or that they have to be those numbers. I mean, they could easily be, the gravitational constant could have been slightly larger or slightly smaller. And the point is that these constants and quantities that are precisely what they are cause this immensely kind of finely tuned life permitting balance. So they are, if you were to change those finely tuned constants or quantities like in a tiny bit, it would have a massive impact on kind of the world, and life would not be able to kind of exist in the way that it does.
And I guess it's not just one constant that needs to be finely tuned. There's a whole range of them, and they need to be right in relation to each other. Yeah. In order for stable universe to exist. So okay. So the argument is, well, what explains that? And those are those seem to be three kind of reasonable options: chance, physical necessity, that they have to be that, or design. And a designer.
A designer, yeah. So it seems to me that to appeal to physical necessity just doesn't. It's just strange to say that you have no good reason to say they have to be this number.
Yeah, it's almost a circular argument in itself.
Yeah. And then and chance. I mean, as much as it's kind of it is a logical option, it seems far less reasonable to just say, there's all of these constants and quantities just happened to randomly fall into exactly what they were in order to kind of have this life permitting universe. It's so tiny, the kind of the odds of that happening, that it's far more reasonable to say, well, actually maybe there is a mind behind the universe that has kind of set these constants and quantities, and kind of that's what explains these laws that govern the natural world.
So that's the basic argument. It's about finely tuned design and order and complexity in the universe, inferring or implying the existence of an intelligent designer. You've already referred to what would be the principal objection to that argument, which is, well, chance can also produce the appearance of design if you've got enough time. And in this case, if you're talking about the fundamentals of our universe, in order for that to have happened by chance, you need lots of universes in which those values are being chosen at random, and one of them happens to be the one that works. And that's the sort of multiverse concept. So that would, I guess, be the main objection to that teleological argument. So what can we say about that?
Well, it kind of seems like that this idea of kind of many universe existing is is deliberately invented to make the option of chance seem more reasonable, which I suppose it does. But the problem with it is that there's just no evidence for the fact that other universes exist. It's just it's just imagination. So, but not only that, but if you think about, there's some kind of mechanism or thing out there that's kind of conjuring up all of these many universes, one of which happens to be our highly ordered universe. I mean, what explains that? What there's something out there making all these universes. And that kind of universe making machine would itself have to be like really highly finely tuned to be able to kind of
and it would need a cause.
Yeah.
So
so which brings us back,
you're back
to the cosmological argument.
And a sort of infinite regress problem. Yeah. Okay. So those two arguments, the cosmological argument, about the beginning of the universe and the first cause, and the teleological argument about fine-tuning and apparent design and order in implying a designer. Those two arguments are all about kind of the physical nature of the universe in which we find ourselves and the matter and so on around us, space-time and so on. So let's move on to the third argument, because that's a little bit different, isn't it?
Yeah. So the third argument that we're going to talk about would be the moral argument for the existence of God. So like you say, we're moving away from kind of thinking about the universe, like what's out there, to something that seems is much more kind of personal. And this argument is essentially saying that God's existence is what best explains the existence of objective morality. So we all kind of have this deep sense of kind of good and bad. Human beings have this deep kind of innate sense of kind of things that are good and things that are bad, and things like love and kindness and justice all seem to us to be not just things that we think are good. They feel objectively good, that they would be good in any kind of possible world you could conjure up. Those things would always be good. And likewise, things like murder and rape and those kind of behaviors feel evil to us. They feel objectively wrong. That it's always an evil thing to kind of commit murder. It's not just a subjective. So that kind of deep sense of morality that we have, which is also, it's not just that. I mean, human beings disagree on right and wrong. Well, that's a good point to make. But, it's not like everyone, everyone doesn't agree. But what we're talking about, I suppose, is more general standards of morality. And what the remarkable thing is that we, cross-culturally and universally, we have this deep sense of some things are just wrong, objectively, and really wrong, and some things are really good. And this kind of exists. I suppose this is what the argument's doing. It's appealing to say that's not something which is a trick. That's something that's real, and every human being has that deep sense that it is a real thing.
Okay.
So the argument is saying, well, where does that come from? This objective kind of moral law of this kind of sense that there are actually right things and there are wrong things. Where does that come from? And the argument is, well, God is the best explanation. There is a kind of standard of kind of goodness that exists outside of the world that is gives rise to this objective morality that human beings have discovered kind of that things are right and things are wrong. And on a naturalistic worldview, I suppose, there's not really any good reason to kind of ground that objective sense of morality.
So when we're saying objective, that's not saying that everybody agrees these things are right and these things are wrong.
No, because they don't.
It's almost one step removed from that, in that everyone has the sense that there are some things that are right and there are some things that are definitely wrong. Even if there's disagreement on what those things might be. So and it's, while a natural kind of evolutionary argument might explain why some altruistic things are good, it doesn't really explain why we feel they're good or wrong or right. Because if they come about through natural selection, it would be a sort of instinctive thing, I guess.
Yeah.
So we're talking about this as a universal feature of the human condition, the human experience. But where does that argument go? Where does that lead us as a possible explanations as to where that comes from?
I suppose what is kind of suggesting is that this need for an objective something that's not part of kind of the natural world, something because I suppose morality doesn't really come from material things.
Nature,
it comes from minds. So I mean that it's human beings who have minds that can that think this, that have this deep sense of kind of morality. So the argument is saying that there needs to be some kind of grounding for this morality, and so there exists this objective standard of good, this like a metaphysical kind of embodiment of kind of goodness, this personal embodiment of goodness, which isn't necessarily God, but it is There needs to be this standard, which is where we kind of get a sense of it from.
As we talk about the possible causes for some of these things, we're inevitably talking about, or using the term God in some ways. But the classic objection to the moral argument would be that you don't need God for morality. You don't need God for people to do good things. And how do we respond to that?
That's absolutely true. I mean the people who don't believe in God can be very good and moral people, and there are many people that don't believe in God who are very good and moral people. That's not really what the argument's saying. It's saying that it's arguing a grounds for these people that are leading moral lives to ground the reason why they can call it, their actions objectively good. Yeah. Okay.
And I suppose the fact that both atheists and theists have that sense of what is right and wrong and maybe choose to behave in ways that are good, possibly contributes to the argument that it's something universal to human beings that needs an explanation.
I suppose even people that don't actually believe in objective morality, that people that believe in kind of moral relativism, they still act as if objective moral values exist, because they still say that's wrong and that's right, and they feel it, that things are wrong and things are good.
Okay, so we've covered our three arguments. So let's just kind of try and wrap up and draw some kind of conclusion. So where do you think those three arguments get us to? We've got the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the moral argument. So where does that leave us?
So I think that we've only looked at those three arguments, but none of those arguments are actually leading you to like the Christian God of the Bible. That's not what they're designed to do. That's not what they're trying to show. They are, and in some ways, taken by themselves, they don't, they don't necessarily lead to the kind of the full of idea of kind of a God. But it's the cumulative case that, like, these arguments built together, you've got a kind of a moral standard of goodness with a moral argument. You've got a reason for the, an all-powerful kind of, or powerful, infinite kind of spaceless, timeless cause, and something that also has a mind that has kind of got intelligence and coherence, that it can that's designed the world, with the teleological, cosmological argument. So all of these things together give you this idea of a personal, morally good designer, creator of the universe. I mean, that's basically what people think of as God, even though it doesn't give you the Christian God of
So when you sort of put together the best explanations for each of those three things that we've looked at, the characteristics that you come up with, the features that you end up describing, essentially sound very much like the concept of God.
What pretty much everyone knows as the concept of God.
I mean, do they get us to certainty about that, though? Do you think?
That's a good question, and not no, I suppose, is the answer. Is that their arguments?
That's a shame.
Well, I suppose it is. They are arguments which are appealing to God as being the best explanation for things, and people have to make up their minds about that. I mean, in some ways, you can't really prove most things to absolute certainty. Like anything, with all decisions in life, you've got to make a decision. And so, but the kind of the power of these arguments, at least to me, is that they are, in their simplest form, like we said at the beginning, they seem so intuitive, and they seem like they really are giving you God as the best explanation for these kind of aspects of the world and how we perceive it, and how we perceive ourselves as well.
And in combination, you've got them building on each other. To support that best explanation. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much for being part of this conversation and taking us through those arguments. It's always interesting to think about these things. And I'll just finish off, I guess, with some references to the Bible. I know we said we weren't going to do that, but I think it's good to just end on. We looked at three arguments. The cosmological argument was all about some timeless, powerful thing, maybe a personal thing that was the cause of the beginning of the universe. And God is described in the Bible as he is from everlasting to everlasting. It's kind of about as good as you can get in ancient language of describing something that's outside time. The teleological argument was all about the looking at the attributes, the order, complexity in the natural world around us, and seeing a designer behind that. Paul, in writing to the Romans, says, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made." So that's kind of that argument in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And then, the moral argument, the source of the sense of morality that seems to be universal to the human experience, coming from a moral lawgiver, if you like. God's character is described when he appears to Moses in Exodus as a God who is merciful and gracious, forgiving iniquity, but who will by no means clear the guilty. So God who is clearly interested in morality. So that's where we'll finish. Thanks again, Sam, for this conversation, and thanks for those that are listening, and we will be with you again soon.
You've been listening to the Bible Feed podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're always keen to hear what you think, hear your questions or subjects you'd like to discuss. So get in touch with us through our Facebook page, or send us a message on our website at biblefeed.org, and be part of the journey.